Good morning, Sister Agnes.
Well, good morning, Kathy. It's so good to see you and be with you.
We're very glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Sister, how would you define charism to someone who was unfamiliar with that word?
Well, I think we learned first of all from St. Paul, if I look at you, is that better? That it's a spiritual gift, a gift of the Spirit that's given for a particular purpose. In relationship to religious life, I would say it's a unique, distinctive character. It's the unique, distinctive character of a gift of the Spirit that makes a given congregation or order different from any other in the church. Now that's a pretty big statement, even though it's a few words, because there are hundreds, thousands of orders and congregations. And obviously, any group like the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Benedictines, they have a charism that applies to any one of the sub-members of the Dominican or Franciscan or Benedictine family. But each one of those families is distinct and different from any other. So I think I would have to say that a charism is that distinctive gift that the Spirit gives, so that we, servants of the Holy Heart of Mary, will just not be like any other congregation in the church. Now, after Vatican II, when congregations and religious groups started going back after the directive of the council to look at their original inspiration in the founders, I discovered in my readings, attending workshops, that what most groups were defining as the charism were not the charism. They were one of the expressions of the charism. I heard so many members of congregations say, our charism is teaching, our charism is nursing, our charism is social work.
Right.
And I thought, how many other people can do the same thing? How many other groups can do the same thing? So I resisted from the beginning, and gratefully our congregation did through its chapters and writings, directives from the general, that we would not be caught in the trap of identifying the charism with one word, but that we would look at its expressions in terms of spirituality, outreach, mission, apostolic works, ministries, as that word came into use more, and that is what made it unique. But what it was in itself, that we might never know. Now, if I can just give a couple of examples, I'm sure Father de la Place had this insight, and I think with him, Mother Marie, because several years after the foundation of the congregation, he founded a branch of the congregation for those sisters who felt drawn to his way of serving the church and living a religious life, but they did not feel called to the works. And so often in the early writings, he refers to the congregation as the work, capital W, the work. And they wanted a contemplative life. So he founded the Servants of the Compassionate Heart of Mary. Now, they lasted 3 or 4 years, and then the members came, either they returned to Servants of the Holy Heart of Mary group, major group, or they went to a contemplative order of another family. And because they weren't able to support themselves, and they really didn't get members, new members. But he realized that there was more to the charism than just what he had first perceived as who we are and who we were from the beginning. And then whenever he did accept a work, and he wanted to send the sisters out. You know, we know they were in Belgium for a while. He always wanted to start something in Germany. He loved England and Ireland, wanted to start something there. Wherever they were members of his own congregation and mission, he kept hoping for a call, first of all to the Congo, you know. All right, well, wherever they went, they did what had to be done there. They didn't necessarily teach. They didn't necessarily set up a home for abandoned or needy children. When they came to the States, we know that what they did, they came to work at St. Viator's College, overseeing the women and men who worked in the various departments of that establishment. So the sisters themselves did that, but they themselves worked then in the infirmary, in the kitchen, in the laundry, and it was only little by little that they went into teaching in Beaverville, that Sister Emerencia started traveling into Chicago to earn her nurse's degree, and the emergency hospital in Kankakee opened. So he was never tied down to a specific work or a specific identification. And even when the sisters did begin to teach, because in the beginning at Roulemont, it was a different kind of training for those little girls. It was very different because they attended school in a local school that was near them. But his idea of education was very much like, I think, a text in Colossians. It was in, I think, in the reading last night at prayer. The fullness of becoming a complete human being in and with and like Christ. Yeah. And whatever that took, and he has some beautiful things on education, whatever that took, it was preparation to live in a different way. So that's a long answer, but it's that distinctive mark that we can't put in a box.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate the differentiation between who you are and what you do. And on the charism committee, you're right, the sisters keep calling us to that. Yeah. Don't confuse it, don't confuse it. It really is a very central theme for the sisters.
Well, that's good.
In the spiritual doctrine of Father de la Place, you wrote, the charism of the spiritual family of Father de la Place can be perceived as the spiritual gift of presence for us who call ourselves members of that family. It is a gift to be wherever the Church calls us to be about whatever the Church needs to have done in that place at that time. Those of us on the Charism Committee love that quote. Is that still how you see the role of the SSCM Charism, or has that changed or nuanced over time?
Well, Kathy, that's an interesting question and a little difficult to answer because I haven't thought of redoing it, you know, or tweaking it or nuancing it. But I need several things if I were going to look at it again from the point of view that you suggested. I need the gift of the Spirit, and I need a very flexible deadline to produce it. Because whenever I'm asked to do anything in terms of writing or talking, I always take weeks sometimes a month or two, to pray about it and think about it. And when I feel ready, I'm set to go. It's like a baby being ready to be born, after the waiting and the pregnancy. And so I probably might find something to nuance a bit, but I don't know what it would be or even if it would be.
Sure.
And so I think I'll just live with that for a while. And if the people on the charism committee and the people living it, the charism, are satisfied, why would I not be, unless there were some clear sign that something ought to be adjusted.
Sure. When you think about that quote, do you think that also applies to the charism as it's lived out by those who are being formed by the sisters as affiliates, as servant companions, as consecrated laity, the Della Place prayer ministers? And if not, how do you think you would need to nuance it?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because, with one exception, I'm really not in touch with servant companions, consecrated laity,
the affiliates.
The affiliates,
servant companions.
that's the exception. Because when I went to Mercy Community about 14 years ago, the community of sisters was not closely identified or working with the affiliate group.
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 sisters who had begun the program there, and they had planned a very solid formation for those affiliates. The lives and spirituality and apostolic outreach of Father de la Place and Mother Marie, the history of the congregation, the influence of Lieberman, the history of the American province. I mean, they had a foundation and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And after a couple of years, maybe it came out of a discussion of the sisters, a couple of us who felt we'd like to be maybe more in touch with the affiliates. So from that time on, we always meet with them. There are a couple of affiliates on the core team that plans the program for each year.
Mm-hmm.
And that preparation has gone on with adjustments and adaptations. And even today, about a year ago, we had a new affiliate person. And actually what she went through was that same program, done in different ways. And the encouragement, because there's some books now that I've done, that she could do the background reading. So it wasn't quite as maybe thorough and far-reaching, but the essentials were there. The spirituality of Father de la Place, the spirituality of Mother Marie, their vision of church, their vision of a congregation, the history of the congregation, all of those elements that were there in the beginning are still there in the presentation, and form new members. Now, I think that is a good thing. And I see in the presentations that the affiliates make with another affiliate, each one does, or with a sister, I think with the sharing that is done both in the meeting and afterwards at the social hour, I think it's obvious, it's very clear to me that they are living the charism, that it is alive and well in them. Now, I think what's an important point that I should bring in, and probably here while I'm thinking of it, is that in the new revised code, Article 55 in community life, the charism of our founders and the charism of the Institute are kept alive by the power of the Holy Spirit. But I think this next sentence is very important. We assume both personal and corporate responsibility to incarnate them anew, so that the love of the Father may be ever more fully revealed, and the people of God become ever more one in Christ. Which says that the charism, while remaining and existing in its essence, actually is going to adapt in its expressions, so that today we don't look like the sisters whose pictures we see from 1860 or 1889. We're not all doing the same works that we did then, apostolic works. We use different vocabulary. Things have changed, and yet they've stayed the same.
Yeah.
But it's each one of us who incarnates through the power of the Spirit that charism, and by the way we live it, we add to its ongoing, I don't want to say evolution, but adaptation and response to the call of the church. And I think that's important to know, that that we don't need a word to say our charism is such and such, but our charism is expressed in the spirituality we live and share, in the different apostolic ministries, in the way we share the family spirit, I think is very important and very significant. And I have found that in the Mercy affiliate group. And, you know, that reminds me of things we hear sometimes in groups of sisters who are sharing their vocation story, our congregation, and even a mixed group, where they'll say, well, I really searched, I really looked, I knew people from different congregations, and then one day I walked into St. Mary's Convent, and I knew this is where I belong. Mm-hmm. And so you just know, through the power of the Spirit, I think, what you're drawn to, and you find the prayers they say, the discussions, the outreach. You think, this is where I belonged all my life, and now I'm here. So I think, I don't know if that's a good answer to that question, but I would guess, and I've never made any of the charism workshops, I would guess that from what I know of the workings of the spirituality group and the charism workshops, I would guess that there's no nuancing that has to be done from what I can see. So
I really appreciated your comment about finding an order and knowing your home, because now I'm not a sister, and yet the first time I walked onto the grounds in Batavia,
yes.
I told Sister Myra it was home. It was just the most astonishing feeling to me. And so I know what you're talking about, although I have not had the blessing of
Yes.
the religious life. I thank you again for sharing your wisdom, for being a part of our day. Thank you so very much.
Good. Thank you, Kathy.